Hi, and welcome to the Focus on the Five podcast. I'm executive coach and host of the podcast, Scott Schilling. I know you might be wondering what Focus on the Five is. Well, it's really a new and innovative concept. It's the backbone of the 5%er movement. Again, if you're still thinking, what the heck is a 5%er? It's the person that's out of the box thinker, the entrepreneur, the early adopter, the disruptors, the founders, the visionaries, the inventors, and the risk takers. I think you kind of get the idea. Well, we're blessed to have Ken Coleman and Kyle Henke here today with us, the co-authors of Focus on the Five. Guys, welcome to Focus on the Five podcast.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for having us.
Now, Ken, you and I have talked quite a bit over the last year about the Focus on the Five movement. Give everybody a little background of where this all started.
Well, it was actually, it's my life. I grew up in communication industry and real estate business, 37 years of it, and to survive in the market that I was in, you had to learn to communicate with people rather quickly and find out how they make choices. And especially when you're buying real estate, you want to know how they make choices and their patterns. So I just, over a process of elimination, selling 6,000 homes and closing them, myself personally, I had to learn to dissect personalities rather quickly and put them in a category and say, okay, how do I approach this individual? How do they make their choices? How do they make their decisions? And so combination of that and just life, and it inspired me. One day I'm sitting literally with my son-in-law, who is a 5%er himself, and I saw it from a different perspective and realized that there people come from different directions, even though they may be born a certain way.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into, a little bit of you were talking, or as we were talking earlier, this is really generational. So you and I are more mature. That's code word for older.
Yeah.
But the fact is, so our generation is boomers, but we're also talking about Gen X, and then we're going to go beyond that too. But Kyle, you've got a different interpretation, or you've got a different realization because of the next generation down. What's your take on the 5%er movement?
Sure, absolutely. So I feel privileged to have been born in the late 70s because I was kind of right on the cusp. I remember the first time I saw the internet. I'm right in that kind of in between when it comes to technology. And my parents were extremely conservative background. So one of the things that we talk about in the book is the fact that depending on how your parents and your influences growing up are, that could change whether you really are able to understand what a 5%er is, or if you're kind of shielded from it. And that's really what I was. I was shielded from it. I'm the youngest of four, and it was one where, hey, you're a good kid, you do what you're supposed to do, you go work at a company for 20, 40 years. So my grandfather worked at the same company for 44 years, my father at the same company for 22 years. And I just kind of realized one day, I'm like, yeah, that's just not the path for me. And I happened to be really lucky that my father-in-law is the gentleman sitting next to me. And I started to notice that, he really looks at the world differently. And the way he makes his decisions aren't based off of being conservative or being too concerned with what other people think. His are more just, he has this innate sense of, I just got to do it. It's hard to explain, and the more he and I were hanging out, the more I'm like, wow, if I would have had this when I was a kid, it'd be interesting to see how different I was. Not to say I still didn't stand out. We can get into that later, but I'd say really the main draw of it for me was that I was kind of sheltered from being my true self when I was younger. And it was right when I was in my early 30s that, again, Ken, my father-in-law, he and I started talking about just the different ways to approach things. And that was really eye-opening for me to get his perspective.
I think it's fascinating. And Ken, I think your desire to share this concept down when you and I first met over a year ago, and we started talking about Focus on the Five, and you started to share some information with me that all of a sudden made me really get introspective. And you and I are much alike in this 5%er mode, right? So, why is it so important to, first of all, educate people? Let's start there on the 5%er movement. Why do they need to know this is, quite frankly, a movement?
Well, for me personally, it's a faith thing. I believe that God spoke to me and said, "This is your agenda." I prayed for it and got it, and that's why I'm here today. It's why we're doing this right now. My desire is to, first of all, help people self-identify, whether they're a 5%er or not. Some of us are born tall, some are born short, but when you're a 5%er, it isn't so obvious. And most people put a tagline on a child and call them weird or, a disruptor. And that bothers me because I actually think they're the next president. I think they're the next overachiever and the person who will make the difference in the world. And so my goal was, and I think it's God's goal, is to identify those people and make sure that the world understands how to raise that type of child and to identify them quickly. Because let's face it, if you're a tall, I tell people all the time, I said, to be an NBA player, you probably need to be tall. But just because you're tall doesn't mean you're going to be an NBA player.
Exactly. I think that's really a valuable point. I think that as a believer, I think we all believe that we're uniquely qualified to do a certain set of tasks, right? God has built us with certain talents and capabilities that are unique to us. And so really the 5%er movement is about maximizing one of those categories, one of those really niche categories, right, of some fairly unique talent that may not be recognized by the folks around them. Is that true?
Yeah, and the one thing I want to make sure to emphasize that focus on the 5 in a word is about choices. It's really what it is. Not to make this a religious thing, but it's, if you look at the Bible itself, the number 1 selling book of all time, it's in one word, about choices. And so the motivation of this book was to talk about the pattern of how people make choices. And there's different personality types that goes left when most people go right. And so they atypically are what we have noted as a 5%er. And, you're trying to think of a name for those people. They don't want to be called a name by their nature. They don't want to be put in a box. And they don't want to be stereotyped.
They're the outside-the-box thinkers.
Well, exactly. So when we debated about the name, my daughter and Kyle's wife, who owns a marketing company, she said, well, you really can't go outside of, you're just talking about a percentage of people. And I said, right, and it ends up being about 5%. So, give or take, who knows, 4.75 or 5, who knows. But it's just a reference, if that makes sense.
Well, I think it makes a tremendous amount of sense. And again, as we did some of the early descriptors, the disruptors, the founders, the visionaries, the inventors, the risk takers, what makes one person, and Kyle, you're the next generation down from Ken and I, what makes one person take that risk, another one avoid that risk?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I think that when it comes to, let's say, a couple, for instance. So Trisha, my wife, is Ken's daughter. So she obviously had the influence of a 5%er, yet on the other side, she had the influence of her mother. And so what she has been kind of drawn to is to understand the 5%er mentality, yet she chooses, because she's more conservative by nature, because she's a mama bear, so to speak. That's really how she looks at the world is, okay, let me kind of minimize my risk, go a little bit more conservative route. And again, I did too when I was younger, just because my parents kept telling me that over and over again. And it was one where I wasn't doing things against their wishes to be, bad by any stretch. It was just, I thought, well, that looks like more fun, and why don't people do this? It'd be like if you're in an auditorium full of people and somebody says, hey, can I have a volunteer? I'm running toward the stage before half the people have their hand up. And then there are other people that they just think getting in front of a bunch of people is, oh my gosh, that just sounds like torture for them. Whereas a 5%er always loves an audience.
So, Ken, is the 5%er inherently born with this? And or is this a skill or a learned personality trait along the way?
I believe a 5%er knows at a very early age that they're a 5%er. And as far as the DNA 5%er, I believe it's a DNA thing. And It's something they sense when they're a child, usually somewhere in that 5 to 8 year old. They get this feeling in the pit of their stomach that they're supposed to become a part of something much bigger than themselves. So they automatically reflex just know that there's a supreme being out there that exists, which gives them a little bit of a superpower. It makes them realize they always have something to fall back on. So they're willing to take risks that others may not. It's the best way that I can explain it, but they are the influencers. That all things that happen in this world are first done by 5%ers.
There's always somebody that takes that leadership role.
Correct.
Right, and they raise their hand. They go out there. They whether it be recess and running out to get to the tetherball game first,
yep.
or to the monkey gyms or whatever it might be. It's funny. All of a sudden, I'm having these flashbacks. This is crazy.
Well, you're one of them. That's why.
Well, no, but I mean, it's intriguing to me because it really is. You can start to kind of define some of these things. Now, does a 5%er always know he's a 5%er? He or she?
Yes, I think they do, just like you know you're tall. Inside you know that you are. But here's the thing. If you're born 7 foot tall and you're born in China, you're weird. And you kind of know it. And so you make a choice to either be 7 foot tall or to live in the world of 5 foot tall people. And if you do, then in my opinion, you're making a mistake because you're not being the person you were born to be. But it's a choice. And, the influencers in our life may say, you know what, son, daughter, you're 7 foot tall and the world was built for 5-footers. And so you would be much happier if you'll try to learn to live life as a 5 foot tall person.
I think that's a really interesting and key fact there is the choice actually becomes the choice of being who you were meant to be, who you were built to be, right?
Right.
And not everybody, spoiler alert, not everybody is built the same,
no.
Right? Not everybody has got the same attributes and the same. Everybody is wonderful. Everybody is unique. Everybody has their own values and talents and capabilities to contribute, and yet it's really the 5%er has to almost a little bit perfect a different set of skills. Is that true?
Yes, I think the sooner that a 5%er recognizes that they were born to be a leader and that they are a person that is to set by example, and they're the ones that should volunteer, and they're the ones who should think outside the box, and they're the ones that should be the visionary, and they're encouraged to do that. At the younger age, they're encouraged to do that. The quicker they're going to become, the library's full of people. In fact, almost every book ever written is about a 5%er, atypically.
That's interesting. And so now, Kyle, you were saying earlier, the other side of this is it comes down to some of the influences you were able to see, maybe differently in your family, that all of a sudden when you came into Ken's family, now all of a sudden you saw some different influences. Did that all of a sudden give you a greater comfort level? A difference of acceptance, kind of?
Totally. I think part of it was permission as well. Again, coming from a background that was, hey, did you check with everybody that this is okay? I'm more of I wouldn't say beg for forgiveness, but yeah, I'm definitely not a permission asker. And that was the main thing is, here I was talking to somebody who didn't ask for permission. And that to me was really the main thing that I'm like, it was almost like you're getting away with something. But the funny part is, like you just said, you're getting away with really being your true self, for really thinking that you want to do things because you want to do them, not because everybody else is, the mainstream is going this way. So yeah, I would definitely say that the permission that I had, it was definitely a aha moment. And then the more conversations we had about it, the more I knew that most people, and that's where it gets back to the whole 5%er thing, literally 19 out of 20 people won't understand it. And that's fine. And that's what I love when Ken and I have these conversations and, people say, oh, I just don't get it. Well, then we know we're we're getting through the people that don't get it so we can get more back to the 5%ers that will get it.
I think that's awesome. I think the thing that's interesting about this, again, we've got Boomer boomers with Ken and I. We have Gen X. And then, but it really comes down to if we could help 8-year-old Ken understand.
Can I share something?
Yeah, I'd love for you to share something. That's where I'm going.
I have 3 grandsons that I'm very proud of. 2 of them live in Austin, Texas. My son, who is he works for Dell, very proud of him. He's one of the fastest promoted in the history of Dell. But he's got these 2 boys. He calls me one day and he says, "Dad," he goes, and they're only a year apart. He said, "My first son, Oscar," he said, "if I tell him don't jump over the couch, he knows that's a rule." And he chalks that up in his mind as, okay, that's a rule, and I'll make mom and dad happy as long as I do the rules. Then another son comes along, Garrett. Garrett's a year younger. Garrett gets told, don't jump over the couch, and Garrett can't jump over the couch fast enough. And so Patrick, my son, who is like Oscar, who knows what the rules are and knows that you're supposed to live by the rules, looks at this son and thinks, is there something wrong with you, kid? Didn't you hear me? And, so he has options to punish him and go through life frustrated with this son that he can't relate to. Or in his case, he pointed out to me, he said, "Dad, thank goodness for Focus on the 5 book, because I now know that Garrett is that kid that if you tell him don't push the button, he can't push it fast enough." And he said, and the book explains to me why. Because what he hears is, I can't push the button.
Interesting. I think that you just brought up a tremendous value to the book, Focus on the 5, is helping parents, helping those of us, again, who might be more mature. We're down the path a little ways, that we can help contribute a little bit of the wisdom learned along the way, right?
Absolutely.
To give some of that parenting skill, or some of the, if it's not parenting skill, it's frustration reduction. Let's go the other way with it, right?
Yeah.
That it's like, boy, if I had only known, right? I can't imagine. It's really funny. What just popped into my mind was that we were doing an exercise one day and with one of my mentors, and he said, just think of your dad bounding downstairs every morning, heading to the breakfast table, going, "Gosh, how can we mess up Scott today?" It just never really happened that way, right?
Right.
And yet, as kids or at certain times in our lives, I think that we kind of think that. Don't you get it? And I think the fact that you're able to identify the 5%er and give people some usable techniques, strategies, tips on how to work with their 5%er better is only going to enhance their lives and the person given the advice. Does that make sense?
No, it does. That's what we hope that the book and the movement of Focus on the 5 creates exactly, Scott. You nailed it. We want to create a soft place by organizing 5%ers across the United States that understand that they are a 5%er and the struggles that they've gone through in their life, that they can help to create a platform, if you will, a soft place to land for the future 5%ers. See, a thing I know and makes me emotionally very attached to this movement is there's a small boy being born right now in a third world country, and he's a 5%er or she's a 5%er. And the reality is that their chances, I'll give an example, 7-foot, kid being born, going to be 7 foot someday in China. What's his chances of ever being the 5%er that he was really born to be? So fortunately, there's a place for him to go. There's a land that was built called USA that was built for 5%ers by 5%ers. 55 men signed the Constitution of the United States, and you can be assured all five of them were 5%ers. They were accomplished men that were men of faith. In fact, they went and prayed the night before they signed the Constitution of the United States, and they had the wisdom to know that if we could create laws and a soft place to land for 5%ers born anywhere in the world, that we would always be a country that would be advanced and be farther than anybody else. And I hope we don't lose those. That's part of the goal of the movement of Focus on the 5. We don't believe that everybody should get a trophy, Scott.
I can trust me. I didn't get a lot. I mean, I got a lot of trophies, but like did I say my ninth grade team was undefeated, unscored upon?
Ooh.
I mean, we had a team
Nice.
of 5%ers. I mean, we went crazy with it. No, I think you're right. I think it's interesting if you've been an achiever through your life.
Right.
Some people look at the fact that you've been an achiever and they say, what's wrong with you?
Right.
Versus, hey, you're an achiever, what's right with you, and how did you help get there? All of a sudden what's coming to me intuitively is the 5%er movement is really that of inclusion, not exclusion. It's actually the inclusion of being in the right place, understood the right way to utilize your talents to their fullest.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that Kyle and I discovered when working together on the book was that the very best of 5%ers is always highly intellectual. They're just by their nature, they have a high level of common sense. So 5%ers are born with this superpower, I'll call it. And it's that ability to be able to think fast on their feet, to be able to make a decision or a choice quickly. And they don't have to ask permission of somebody else to do that. So that's what creates a natural born leader. I mean, obviously,
there's a reason it's called natural born.
Natural born. Yeah, it's that
That makes
DNA
sense.
thing.
Right.
It's that DNA thing. And so we think it's really important to point that out because here's the reality. 95% of the world cannot spot that 5%er easily. And if they do spot them, they just see them as a disruptor, especially at a young age. And wouldn't it be cool if we could just take a number of those children, maybe all of them someday, and say, wow, that kid's tall. That kid's
And going to be tall.
And going to be tall.
And we can start to plan ahead and start to utilize the natural gifts and talents that have been granted.
Absolutely. That's the next kid that's going to solve cancer or going to solve world problems. I believe that all things come from the 5%er. And I think God in his wisdom knew not to make too many people those 5%ers because the world would be very, very imbalanced. But that makes sense.
A lot of confrontation going on.
Yeah.
A lot of everybody trying to get their point through all at the same time.
Right.
But again, as we talked earlier, there's the DNA-based 5%er, but then there's the learn
Yes.
your way to that 5% base to really be able to get in there. Kyle, if you were as the next generation down, having that encouragement to be able to learn your way in, and what was it like to all of a sudden now have influences that then encouraged you to maximize your gifts and talents?
Sure, great question. So I like how you said inclusion before, because that's really how it felt was the opposite before I realized the whole 5%er thing. It was hey, you're supposed to suppress those feelings of wanting to, cheer and get the crowd going. You want to suppress those ideas that you have that are so outside of the box and just conform. So I'm actually pretty excited because I feel like the time of people are used to more entrepreneurial minded things. People are, it's not like it was back in the 50s and 60s where the roles and, not getting into gender and all that, but the roles were more clearly defined. And I feel like the fact that now we're entering 2020 and things are blurred quite a bit. So I think that really does lend itself as one of the best times in history for the knowledge component, people to be exposed to it and then to identify with it and say, yeah, this is a movement that I want to be a part of. And I really feel like the inclusion is the main thing because once they see, like Ken and I did, once we started collaborating on a project, I mean, obviously we have fun talking to each other, but the collaboration part and the brainstorming sessions and, he'd call me at 2 a.m. with a crazy idea, or I'd wake up the next morning with 20 text messages trying to really just dial in on some of these ideas. Because when you find another 5%er, you know that they get it. You already have this baseline that you can work with together. And then when you start to collaborate, that's when things really get interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that part's exciting for sure. My dad, not to one-up you with the 22 and 26 years, my dad worked for the same company for 46 years.
Wow.
Age 17 to 63 when he retired. So that's the model that I saw, right? So I came out of college and I worked in corporate America for 13 years because that's what you did, right?
Sure.
Now it's interesting because I was a 5-sport athlete. I was doing the other things,
Sure.
right? I was getting that 5%er fix elsewhere and brought the 5%er attitude to that corporate environment. But it was interesting when I was encouraged to be far more entrepreneurial. It's amazing how much freer you felt, how much more fulfilled.
The thing that I've found, Scott, is that in my time of interviewing 5%ers and talking to them is that everyone who is a 5%er has influencers in their life. You had yours. I would be interested in knowing who was that influencer in your life that gave you permission to be the 5%er that you were born to be.
Well, I think it's interesting. I was asked this. I was doing somebody else's show last week, and they asked a very similar question. And I said, well, as a 5-sport athlete, you had coaches. You had people imparting expertise to you.
Sure.
We had a Michigan State All-American running back was my 8th grade football coach.
Oh, wow.
So think of the value of the title.
And don't you know he was a 5%er?
Well, there's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And so you start to see the different things. I was fortunate enough to play for the legendary Hayden Fry at the University of Iowa, and oh my goodness, I learned life lessons.
I bet.
Not just football lessons.
Sure.
I learned probably more life and business lessons from him than I learned football. So I think that's the other part of it. I think as a 5%er, you're seeking and searching for that wisdom and guidance.
Yes.
From somebody that feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
You kind of try it on.
yeah.
Right?
Well,
Doesn't that
it's
make
hard
sense?
to find. Well, and let's face it. If 95% of the world is not a 5%er, then when you do find one you can connect with, such as a coach or a friend or a business associate, I'm very blessed. I have 5 business associates that formed Focus on the 5, all 5%ers. And I surround myself with that group of people now. I've dedicated the rest of my life to, that's why we call it Focus on the 5. We see the value of that, that if we as a nation, as a group, as a movement can do that, then we could make some changes that would just be, how would you measure that? Invaluable.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important to emphasize that this is an inclusionary movement.
Yes.
This is, there's a reason a visionary is called a visionary.
Yep.
They have a vision.
Right.
There are still people that have to then recognize, buy into that vision, and move and now execute towards it.
Yes.
But again, to have somebody who's not necessarily gifted or skilled at creative, it's not that they're not gifted and skilled at something.
Right.
It's just that's not their gifting.
Right.
I think that's called frustration.
Well, right. One of the things that to become a successful 5%er, I'd say, in the terms of books written about someone or earning high levels of money, I think to become that person, you got to have motivation. And so this book is not about motivation. There's been a lot of great books written on that, but it is about choices and what influences us to go left. So, I do believe this. I believe that there's going to be a lot of people listen to this, hopefully podcast, that will wake up and say, wow, wait a minute. He just gave me, and they just gave me permission to become the 5%er I was born to be. I have lived most of my life being told to not be that way, to fit in, to be loved. One of the interesting things about a 5%er that I've learned, Scott, that they may need love more than anybody else. They have this inherent thing about them to be socially accepted. So it's funny because here they're needing to be accepted, but at the same time they need to think outside the box and do and act on their own. So it's a
powerful dichotomy.
It is.
Really. It's the 5%er lives the yin and the yang themselves. Within their own.
They end up a lot of them divorced.
Well,
unfortunately.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So I can relate.
Well,
to
it's
that.
a
But I
struggle.
also now just want you to know, yesterday was my 24th wedding anniversary as well. So
You have that exceptional wife, no doubt. that's learned how to put up with a 5%er.
That part's true. So we're running out of time here. Kyle, tell us one last little tip from Focus on the 5, the book. Give somebody one last little nugget to rest on so that they can go chase out and get this book.
So one of the major driving forces behind the book, like Ken said, there are tons about motivation, self-help, all that sort of stuff. That is not what this book is about. This book was designed to be a read that is more along the lines of you're watching play production, or it's almost a movie script. We didn't want to be here's a definition, here's the answer, a bunch of formulas. We wanted to be more of a story, almost like Ken said, kind of some of the best stories go along with the lives of people, and they really get you vested in the characters as opposed to just trying to absorb a bunch of information. So again, that's really my main thing in helping to co-author the book, was to make it super readable so that when people are done with it, whether you buy into the whole 5%er thing, you're still entertained and informed by the book.
That's awesome, and obviously we want to downstream this from the Boomer generation through the Gen Xers all the way down to the Millennials and beyond. Obviously, and that's why we're going to have more than one podcast, because we're going to actually talk to, if you would talk to the 8-year-old you, what would you leave? But Ken, let's leave one last little piece of wisdom for everybody, and then we'll let them know where they can get Focus on the 5, the book.
Well, I think that the main thing is that if you know that you're the 5%er that we've described here in this little session, I would suggest to get a hold of us and become a part of the movement. And that doesn't cost you anything. It's just basically there's power in numbers. And we would love to hear from you and love to know what's going on in your life. And we would encourage you to maybe even write one of our legacy books, which we will have on the podcast in the future. And reach out to us if you think you might like to be interviewed on the podcast, and just become a part of the movement itself. That way you can make a difference.
What's the best way for everybody to get a hold of you?
For us, it would be to contact us at Focus on the 5, Ken at focusonthe5.com, or Kyle at focusonthe5.com, either one.
Awesome. And where can we get the book?
You can go to Amazon. It's too easy.
I've heard of them.
Yeah.
Everybody. They seem to have a few there. Yeah. So the book is Focus on the 5, co-authored by Ken Coleman and Kyle Hankey. And thank you all for joining us. We're going to be talking to some tremendous topic experts. Again, the visionaries, the risk takers, the outside-the-box thinkers. Please join us on Focus on the 5 podcast. And until next time, God bless. We'll see you soon.